Josh sat on the sunlit veranda of his suburban Chicago home, holding a box with a ring inside. Inside was the very ring he had been choosing for almost 2 weeks, considering every detail. His heart was pounding as he imagined her face, surprised, delighted, radiant with happiness. Amber, her name alone was like the whisper of a warm wind. She was his everything, his one and only. 3 years together. 3 years of laughter, walks in the park, conversations until dawn, and kisses in the rain. She was the one who dissected his jokes, laughing until she cried. She knew his strengths and weaknesses, always supporting him in difficult moments. Josh couldn't imagine a future without her, and today he planned to take that step. Amber, I knew it from the first glance, he rehearsed to himself, pacing around the room. You are my life. Will you marry me? These words sounded perfect, but something inside still trembled. What if she refuses? The thought flashed through his mind, but he pushed it away. Their love was genuine. She would definitely say yes. In the evening, he took her to their favorite restaurant by the lake. Amber laughed, her hazel eyes sparkling in the candlelight. She tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, smiling. You're acting strange today, Josh, she said, tilting her head as if studying him. Just nervous, he replied, feeling his palms grow damp. When the waiter brought dessert, Josh got down on one knee. The entire restaurant fell silent. Amber, he began, feeling his throat go dry. You have become everything to me. You make my life better. Will you do me the honor of being my wife? Her eyes filled with tears, and she covered her mouth with her hand to stifle a sudden gasp. A moment later, she nodded. Yes, Josh, yes! The restaurant erupted in applause, but he only heard her voice. Josh was on cloud 9. From that moment on, everything happened so quickly. Discussing the wedding, choosing the venue, guests, flowers, cake. Amber took on most of the organization, and he didn't mind. He trusted her completely. Sometimes he would watch her, engrossed in flipping through catalogs or arguing with florists, and feel an incredible gratitude to fate. This was his woman, his future. One evening, as they were discussing the guest list, Amber casually mentioned, By the way, the girls want to throw me a bachelorette party. We thought Vegas would be a good idea. Josh raised an eyebrow, trying to figure out if she was serious. Vegas? Really? She laughed and nodded. Yes, it's just for a couple of days. Nothing wild, just the girls, cocktails, and relaxation. He smirked, feeling a slight unease, but pushed it away. Okay, he said. Just don't gamble away all our savings. Oh, don't worry, she replied, hugging him. I'll be good. And he believed her. When the morning of her trip arrived, Josh helped Amber pack her suitcase. They joked and laughed as usual. Are you sure you don't want to join us and ruin all the fun? She teased, zipping up her suitcase. No, he said, smiling. I trust you. Besides, I'll have my own bachelor party. Just promise to behave. She playfully punched his shoulder. Stop. You have no reason to worry. When they arrived at the airport, Josh kissed her goodbye. Be careful, he said, watching her disappear through the gates. He didn't know that this would be the last time he would see her without a sense of betrayal. Friday evening became the beginning of familiar loneliness for Josh. Amber had gone to Las Vegas with her friends, and he was left at home, trying to fill the silence with TV shows and pizza. Time dragged slowly, but he reassured himself with the thought that in a few days, everything would return to its usual rhythm, and they would start counting down to the wedding again. He believed he knew her better than anyone, and there was no reason to doubt her promise to behave. But something went wrong on the very first night. Amber sent him a short, "Good night, sweetie, already missing you," around midnight. Usually she would respond longer, adding cute emojis or sharing impressions of her day. This time the text was dry, as if sent in a hurry. Is everything okay? He asked in response, but there was no reply. Another hour later, Josh closed his eyes, convincing himself that she was probably just tired after the flight and a busy day. Meanwhile, in Las Vegas, neon lights shimmered, music blared through the streets, and people immersed themselves in the chaos of nightlife. Amber and her friends had rented a luxurious suite in one of the most prestigious hotels on the Strip. The girls laughed, drank cocktails, and looked forward to an evening filled with madness. Amber, this is your bachelorette party. You should feel free. Maddie, clearly the most excited in the group, handed her another glass of a brightly colored drink. Let's not go overboard, Amber replied uncertainly, but the smile on her face betrayed her curiosity. Tonight, you should forget about everything, including the fiancé. Another friend shouted, nudging Amber toward the suite's exit. They found themselves in a club where everything was saturated with an atmosphere of temptation. Men in expensive suits, women in sparkling dresses, music that seemed specially created to make one forget reality. At first, Amber tried to be modest, drinking a little less than the others, refusing offers to dance. But gradually, the tension melted away under the influence of alcohol and the general mood. Amber, that guy is looking at you. Maddie pointed to a tall brunette at the bar. Amber waved it off, but her heart beat a little faster. The stranger noticed her glance, raised his glass, and winked. This was the moment she would later call a terrible mistake. At the same time, Josh was sitting at home at his bachelor party, which was far from the idea of a last night of freedom. A couple of friends, beer, pizza, old stories. He laughed, feeling calm, not knowing that at that very moment, Amber was dancing with a stranger, and soon another man would join them. She no longer responded to his messages. On Sunday evening, as Amber's trip was coming to an end, Josh noticed that the anxiety inside him was growing into something more. Her responses had become short and dry, calls ended on the second ring, and her voice sounded strange. Amber, how was your day? He asked, trying to sound casual. Oh, wonderful. We went to a show, did some shopping. Nothing special, she replied, but her words sounded like a pre-prepared text. Are you sure everything is okay? He couldn't hide his concern. Josh, stop. Everything is fine, she said irritably, and the conversation ended. Late that evening, his phone vibrated. It was Maddie. Josh, her voice trembled. I need to tell you something. I can't keep it a secret anymore. His heart stopped. What happened? Amber, she cheated on you. He didn't immediately understand her words. What? What are you talking about? She met two guys at the club. They drank, danced, and then I saw her leave with them. I tried to stop her, but she didn't listen. Josh, I'm so sorry. Josh's world crumbled. The words sounded like they were from another world, a distant one where this could be true, but not in his life, not with Amber. Are you sure? He whispered, hoping it was some kind of mistake. I saw it with my own eyes. From that moment on, everything that had seemed so solid began to crumble before his eyes. The silence of the house, which used to bring him peace, now weighed heavily on him. He sat on the edge of the bed, not knowing what to do next. His heart tightened and his mind desperately sought explanations. But one thing was clear. What had been between them would never be the same again. Josh sat at the kitchen table, holding his head in his hands. He hadn't slept all night, but fatigue couldn't drown out the clamor of thoughts in his head. He looked at his phone as if expecting it to come to life and give an answer that didn't exist. The conversation with Maddie echoed in his mind. She cheated on you. I saw it with my own eyes. These words burned him, turning his trust to ashes. When the clock struck 9 in the morning, Josh gathered his courage and picked up the phone. He had to hear it from her. Hey, Josh! Her voice sounded lazy, sleepy, as if nothing had happened. Amber, we need to talk. His voice was cold, and even he didn't recognize himself. About what? She asked, but he caught a note of tension. I talked to Maddie. He paused briefly on the other end of the line, which said a lot. She told me what happened in Vegas. A long silence tore at his patience, and then her soft, almost lifeless voice said, Josh, I made a mistake. A mistake? Anger was already rising in his voice. This is not just a mistake, Amber. You slept with two guys while we were planning our wedding. How could you? I was drunk. I wasn't thinking. I'm so sorry. Her voice broke, and he heard her start to sob. But these tears didn't touch him. They sounded like an attempt to evade responsibility, as if she regretted not her actions, but being caught. You knew what you were doing, he said, trying to keep the tremor out of his voice. You didn't think about me, about us, about how I feel. You just decided it was your right. Josh, I love you. This means nothing. It was just one night and I didn't want to hurt you. If you didn't want to hurt me, you wouldn't have done it. You destroyed everything we had, and I can't look at you the same way anymore. Josh, please don't leave me, she pleaded. He felt his heart tighten but quickly suppressed the feeling. There won't be a wedding, Amber. I can't marry someone who betrayed me like this. Are you really going to throw us away because of one mistake? Her voice became sharper. You made your choice, Amber, he said firmly. Now I'm making mine. He pressed the end call button without waiting for her response. The silence that followed was suffocating, but it was the only thing that belonged to him now. In the following hours, he tried to cope with the storm of emotions. Anger, pain, disappointment, everything mixed into a single chaos. With each memory of her, with each reminder of their wedding plans, a sense of loss grew inside him. His thoughts were interrupted by the vibration of his phone. It was her again. Message after message, call after call, but he ignored them all. She wanted to talk, to apologize, but he no longer wanted to listen. Later, when he finally glanced at the screen, he noticed a message from Maddie. Josh, you did the right thing. You deserve someone who values you. These words didn't bring relief, but they held truth. In the evening, he sat on the couch, staring at the blank TV screen. The silence of the house had become suffocating. There was no sound of her voice, her laughter, the sound of her footsteps on the floor. Instead, there were only memories of betrayal. When the phone vibrated again, he picked it up, expecting another message from Amber. But it was Tess. Josh, I heard what happened. I'm sorry. If you need to talk or just distract yourself, let me know. I'm here. Her words were simple, but they touched him. Unlike Amber, she wasn't trying to justify anyone or pressure emotions. She was just there. Josh replied a few minutes later. Thanks, Tess. I think I could use a talk. That night became a new starting point. It was far from easy, but Josh felt for the first time that he was no longer alone. He didn't know where life would take him, but one thing was clear. The old path no longer existed. The evening was warm, but Josh felt a chill run down his skin. He sat in his car, parked near a small bar on the corner, looking at the glowing sign. His hands gripped the steering wheel, thoughts racing in his head. This place felt foreign, but it was better than the empty house. He had just sent a message to Tess. I'm here. Coming in now. Tess greeted him inside with a soft smile. She sat at a table in the corner, her blonde hair tied in a loose ponytail, her eyes expressing a mix of warmth and slight concern. On the table stood her glass, half full of some amber drink. Josh, she said, standing up to hug him. Her touch was warm, and for the first time in a long time, he felt that someone cared. Thanks for coming, he said, sitting down across from her. I'm glad you reached out. You need this. Her voice was soft, almost a whisper, as if she was afraid to disrupt his fragile state. They talked for hours. Josh told her everything, how he found out about the betrayal, how he felt his world collapse. Tess listened attentively, not interrupting, only occasionally asking cautious questions. You're stronger than you think, she said when he fell silent, trying to keep the tremor out of his voice. Stronger? He smirked, but his eyes held pain. I feel like a complete idiot. I believed in her. I thought we were building something real. That doesn't make you an idiot, Josh, she replied, tilting her head. Her hand gently covered his, warm and soothing. You believed in love. That's better than being cynical. Her touch was almost imperceptible, but it sent a wave of warmth through his body. He looked at her, and their eyes met. There was something in her gaze that he hadn't noticed before. Sincerity, tenderness, and perhaps something more. When they left the bar, the night was deep, the air fresh and filled with silence. Tess stopped next to Josh's car, folding her arms across her chest. Thanks for listening to me, he said, not knowing how to express his gratitude for her patience. You know I'm here for you, she replied, and there was a strange confidence in her voice that he hadn't expected. Their eyes met again, but this time he felt something more. The space between them grew smaller until he noticed her breath deepen. Tess, he began, but she had already taken a step closer. You don't have to say anything, she said softly, her voice trembling, but her eyes held desire. She rose on her tiptoes and their lips met. The kiss was soft, almost hesitant, but it held such depth that Josh felt the world around him dissolve. Her lips were warm, yielding, and it felt so right that he couldn't stop. His hands slid to her waist, pulling her closer. She responded, wrapping her arms around his neck, and now the kiss became more confident, passionate. Josh felt his heart beat faster, and the warmth of her body intensified his desire. "Are you sure?" she whispered, pulling away from him for just a moment, her face so close, her eyes sparkling. "I haven't been so sure of anything in a long time," he replied, his voice husky, filled with emotion. He pulled her close again, and this kiss was completely different, deeper, filled with passion and desperation at the same time. Her hands slid over his shoulders, leaving a feeling of warmth and closeness that he hadn't felt in a long time. They found themselves at the door of his house almost without realizing how they got there. Josh opened the door, and as soon as they were inside, Tess pulled him to her, her hands confidently wrapping around his neck. "You're doing the right thing," she said, their foreheads touching, her voice barely audible. But he felt every word. His palms explored the curves of her body, his movements slow, as if afraid to break the moment. Her skin was warm, and her touch sent a wave of excitement that coursed through his entire body. That night was theirs. Everything else, including the pain of the past, became distant, like a shadow they left behind. Sunlight filtered through the curtains, filling the room with soft morning light. Josh woke up, feeling the warmth beside him. Tess lay next to him, her blonde hair spread out on the pillow, her breathing even and calm. He looked at her, unable to believe that after everything that had happened, he could feel so peaceful. He carefully got up, trying not to wake her, and headed to the kitchen. Making coffee had become his ritual, a way to organize his thoughts. In his mind, echoes of last night's conversation lingered. Her laughter, her touch, their conversations. It was as if the past had finally stepped aside, making way for something new and bright. But their morning was short-lived. As he poured coffee into 2 cups, there was a sharp knock at the door. Josh froze. He wasn't expecting anyone, and a strange feeling of unease crept into his chest. He approached the door and opened it, hoping to see a neighbor or the mailman. But standing on the doorstep was Amber. Her face looked haggard, her eyes swollen as if she had been crying for a long time. She clutched her purse as if it were the only thing giving her support. "Josh," she said, her voice trembling. He felt his heart tighten, but not from love or regret, but from a mix of anger and surprise. "What are you doing here, Amber?" I know I messed up," she began, taking a step closer, but he remained in place, blocking the entrance. "I know I ruined everything, but please, hear me out." Her voice sounded desperate, her eyes filled with tears. She looked at him as if he were her last hope. "Amber, you shouldn't have come here," he said firmly. "Please," she interrupted. "I know what I did, and there's no excuse. But I need you, Josh. I'm willing to do anything to get you back. Anything." Before he could respond, he heard soft footsteps behind him. He turned and saw Tess. She stood at the living room doorway, her gaze cold and focused. Amber noticed her, and a flash of anger appeared in her eyes. "You're with her?" Her voice became sharp, almost accusatory. "That's none of your business," Josh replied, trying to keep his composure. "You went from me to her?" Amber took a step forward, her voice filled with indignation. "After everything we had, you just replaced me?" Tess didn't back down. She calmly approached, looking straight at Amber. "Josh didn't replace you. You destroyed what you had." Amber shot her a hateful glance. "You were always waiting for your chance, weren't you? You thought I didn't notice? You're so pathetic." "That's enough, Amber," Josh interrupted, his voice firm. "You came here not to attack Tess. You came to justify yourself. But that changes nothing." Amber looked at him, her eyes filling with tears. "Josh, please. I know what I did, and I hate myself for it. I was stupid. I was drunk. But I love you. I'm willing to do anything to fix this." He was silent, feeling the remnants of old love and anger battling inside him. "Fix?" he finally said. "Do you think this can be fixed? You destroyed my trust, Amber. You destroyed everything we built." "But I was yours," she cried out. "We were going to get married. Doesn't that mean anything?" It meant everything to me. His voice grew softer, but it held pain. And to you? She was silent, and he continued. I can't go back to what was. We're done. You need to understand that. Tess stepped closer, placing her hand on his shoulder. Josh has said everything that needs to be said, she said calmly, looking straight at Amber. Amber stared at her with hatred, but then her face contorted with pain. She didn't say another word, just turned around and left, slamming the door behind her. When everything quieted down, Tess turned to Josh. Are you okay? He looked at her, his eyes expressing a mix of relief and fatigue. Now I am. Tess smiled, and he suddenly realized how much her presence and support meant to him. Several weeks had passed. Josh's house, which had once been filled with shadows of his past, now reminded him of a new beginning. There were no more photos of Amber, neither on the walls nor on the shelves. Instead, the space was filled with his own things, paintings, books, gifts from friends. But most importantly, Tess's presence. She spent more and more time in his house, and her presence brought peace. She didn't rush things, didn't insist on turning the page of his life right away. She was simply there, patient and sincere. One evening, they sat on the veranda, wrapped in blankets. Autumn was just beginning to set in, and the air was cool but fresh. Josh held a cup of hot tea, watching the sun slowly set. Do you think she'll come back? Tess asked, breaking the silence. He thought for a moment, then shook his head. Amber, I think she understands it's over. Are you sure there aren't any traces left that you haven't dealt with? He turned to her, his gaze warm but confident. Tess, if it weren't for you, I might still be stuck in this. But now, for the first time in a long time, I feel like I can move forward. She smiled and her hand found his. Josh squeezed her palm, feeling the warmth of her touch seep into his soul. The next day he made a decision. They had talked about it for a long time, discussing the pros and cons, weighing whether to take such a serious step. But now he was sure. We're leaving, he said to Tess as they packed his things. Are you really ready? Her voice was soft, but her eyes shone with hope. Yes, this city, this house, they were part of my past life. I don't want them to be part of my future. I want to start fresh, with you. And so the day of the move arrived. Their belongings were loaded into the truck, and their car stood at the entrance, ready to go. Josh looked back at the house that had been his refuge for so many years. Now it was just a building, nothing more. Ready? Tess asked, coming up to him. More than ever, he replied, and they got into the car together. The journey was long, but each mile felt like a liberation. They listened to music, talked, and laughed. Tess told funny stories from her youth, and Josh reminisced about funny moments with friends. When they reached the new city, they were greeted by bustling streets and fresh energy. Here, no one knew them, and it was wonderful. Their first evening in the new house was modest. Cardboard boxes were stacked in the corner. The furniture wasn't assembled yet, but it didn't matter. They sat on the floor, lit a few candles, and opened a bottle of wine. What do you think we should start with? Tess asked, raising her glass. With just being happy, he replied, smiling. She laughed, and that laughter became the sound of a new beginning for him. The past no longer weighed on Josh. Amber was a memory, a painful lesson he had managed to survive. Tess had become his present, his support, and his future. Together they were building something new, something that no longer associated with pain, but only with joy and hope. And as he looked at Tess, he understood that everything he had been through had led him to this moment, to the moment when he could say that he was happy again.